In this video, I will provide you with two things. One of those will be something to think about when using plywood for collar ties. And the next will be using gravel instead of concrete to support your shed foundation. So let's go ahead and get started with a few measurements. Here we have an 8-foot by 8-foot floor, and it's sitting on top of gravel. And I would imagine any kind of gravel is going to be fine. I don't think I would get road base. You want to get gravel 3/4 inch, probably would be fine, 3/8 of an inch. You don't want any gravel with any sand in it. And I'm not saying that won't work. I'm just thinking it won't work as well for drainage. And you're basically going to build two frames, one frame on the bottom to hold the gravel and the other above that. And what this will do will allow water to soak through this area onto the ground and keep the wood for the frame nice and dry. Now obviously in the wintertime it's not going to be completely dry. You live in an area where it snows, this might not be the way to go. But of course if you live in an area where it snows, you could have snow up against the shed, and that could also cause a variety of different problems. The shed might need to actually just be metal if that's the case. So here we have the gravel, kind of reverse build it here. Our little frame, you're going to need to level off the area here and then create a nice level box. And the whole theory behind this is that any moisture that is on the ground is going to be heading somewhere else. If you build your shed in a low spot, you might need to raise it higher up off of the ground if you're going to use this gravel method, or again, like I said, might not work. You're going to fill it with gravel, not too difficult, and put a box. Now the advantage here is you can just use 2x4s. I don't know why you would need to go any larger. You're going to have constant, every member here is going to be sitting on top of the gravel, or at least not spanning very far, maybe 6 inches, 12 inches, something like that at the most, in an area where it might not be touching the gravel. Put the plywood on top, and again, 8-foot by 8-foot, nice no waste for your shed there. Another thing you can do for your shed will be to drill holes in the outside frame there for water drainage. I don't know if this is really going to be a big deal. The water should drain into the soil out from the gaps here. But again, and you could drill more holes, whatever you feel you need. If you have a frame that you build and you put caulking around everything and you bury it in the ground and you notice that this is filling up with water, then definitely going to need some type of holes here. View of it there. Again, the whole theory is that the water is going to drain through here and out safely away and keep your shed floor nice and dry. So here we have our stakes. You don't want to cover up the holes with your stakes. Not too difficult. A level frame built out of 2x4s. And if you're looking for a little more security, maybe something that's not going to rot, you live in an area where the water is going to have a little more water, you can always use treated lumber and treated lumber for your stakes also. And don't forget, you can always use metal. Use metal for your stakes if that's going to work out for you. And of course, we can always use larger lumber, 4x4s. And here I have the stakes on the inside. You can always put them on the outside. A lot of times it looks better if they're on the inside. And then if there's ever a problem, you're not going to be able to, if you don't have a wide enough area, you can always put the stakes on the outside of this if you're having problems with the stakes deteriorating or rotting. So here we have our holes in the 4x4s again. That might not be necessary. Treated lumber for the frame with maybe some heavy-duty stakes. Here we changed it to 2x4s. On the side, you can always have them around the front, and you can always have more of them. So something like this might require some longer stakes, or even more of them. However you want to put it. Now, this is probably getting a little carried away. I got them 12 inches on center here on every board, but I'm just kind of throwing out an idea. If you're in an area where the wind blows a lot and you're worried about the shed blowing over, something like that, then you might want to put a few more stakes in. And again, you don't have to just run them around the perimeter. You can put them on the inside here. So I will leave it up to you whether or not you get carried away there. So if you're going to do something like this with the stakes, I don't recommend filling the gravel first. Build your frame, make sure that it's nice and level. Drive all of the stakes in. You don't want to be driving the stakes through the gravel. That just seems like a lot of extra work. Drive all the stakes that you're going to put in, and then fill it with gravel. Another option would be to use 4x4s, or again, you can use larger wood. I'm just using 4x4s. I'm not under the impression that you're going to need heavy duty boards for something like this, because the gravel's going to keep the moisture away from the wood. I don't even know if you're going to need treated lumber for something like this. So again, the stakes and stuff, yes, this is going to depend upon the wind. You get a lot of wind, you want to build your shed in the back field of an open area where there's nothing blocking it, and you get strong winds, you better figure something out to brace it to the ground a little, make it so that it's not going to blow away. And these stakes just might be exactly what you need to prevent that from happening. Now, I want to also point out that I put a 2x4 on the outside. This is just so that I could nail it into the 4x4s, make it a little easier. If you're going to use a 4x4 on the outside, knock yourself out. You just might need to use some type of building hardware, some hangers, or some longer nails or screws, something like that. Now, if you're paying attention here, I changed this up. Instead of putting a 4x4 on the outside, I put a couple of 2x4s, and I actually built a shed or a planter in my backyard with this method. I think I built it about 4 years ago. It's still doing fine. So a little bit of the wood is rotted, but most of it is still looking pretty good. I did not use treated lumber for that. And again, I don't know if you would need to use treated lumber for this. I wouldn't think you would, but if you live in an area where any wood that's on the ground rots within a year or two, then you're going to have to get ground rated treated lumber. You're going to have to consider spending a few more dollars for something like this. And of course, the framing plates can actually lap over to where you can create a nice strong connection like that. And we have some stakes in the middle, and I don't know, cannot say for sure if something like this would prevent the 4x4s from moving up and down, if that would provide you with a lot of structural strength. And it might depend upon how long the stake is. If you drive a 2-foot stake in the ground here, you might have a lot of structural strength. And of course, as I said before, build the frame, drive all the stakes in the ground, then put the gravel in. And I also don't think it's going to be a problem if some of the gravel goes a little higher. I don't know if you need to fill the whole area up, but if you have it about an inch higher, that might provide you with a little more stability also. And hopefully that makes sense. Next up, let's take a look at a video that I watched a few years ago that suggested it would be okay to use plywood gussets instead of rafter ties for a small shed. And I really don't think this is going to be that big of a deal. You're building something like we have here that's 8 foot by 8 foot. Knock yourself out. If you live in an area where it snows a lot and you're worried about a heavy load on top of the shed, maybe don't do this. But other than that, I don't really see a problem with it. However, you can build it conventionally for only probably, I'm guessing, about spending another $20 and make it a little stronger. Why not do that? So if you're going to build a small shed and you want to use these plywood gussets to connect the rafters, I got a couple of things I just want to point out. This is something that an engineer might not approve. And again, for a small shed, they might. But for a larger, anything larger than 8 foot by 8 foot, I don't know. And again, I'm not about to suggest that you can't do something like this, because I don't know what size rafters and plywood you're going to be using. If you're going to use a 8-foot sheet of plywood here and create some type of a truss or something like that, you're going to have something that's pretty sturdy. You're just going to nail them up on the top, maybe use a 1/2-inch plywood, something like that. That's not going to be as strong as if you had different lumber sizes and different plywood thicknesses and larger amounts of lumber being used. So I hope that makes sense. But something like this is going to be a little stronger. And all we're going to be doing is adding one collar tie and a ridge. So it's like, why not go back to the tried and true stuff that works? Remember, collar ties are usually spaced 4 foot on center. Here we have 2x4 roof rafters for the shed, and they're, I'm guessing, about 5 foot long, something like that, possibly 6 foot long. And we come to the 4 foot right in the middle of the shed. We got a rafter tie in here, not complicated. Now I understand if you're going to build a shed, you're looking for headroom or something like that. then you might not want to put a rafter tie in here. But why not? Even if you're using the other method and you put a rafter tie in here, and if you use the other method and you put a rafter tie on each one of the rafters, it's going to be stronger. So if you are going to use that, the other method, for an 8-foot by 8-foot shed, and I think someone sent me a question a while ago that was building an 8-foot by 16-foot shed, and they wanted to use the gusset method, and they've seen it on a video. And I came across the video the individual did about within the past 2 months. And again, it takes me back to all of the stuff on YouTube that either doesn't work at all, works okay, or something in a situation like this can be improved drastically by simply adding 2 pieces of wood. So that's the main point I want to make with the video here is, for a shed, small shed, you can get away with building things. If the shed falls down, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody, what's the big deal? It's not a house. It's something that can be tore down and fixed. But if you want something that's going to last a long time, stick with the tried and true methods, the methods that work. Conventional roof framing, this works. If I want this roof to be a little stronger, I'm going to use 2x6 roof rafters, maybe a 2x8 ridge. If I don't want to have any rafter ties, I'm going to put a ridge beam in here and have it supported by some posts on the end. And again, you have more information on that at the website. And I got separate pages just for sheds and for roof framing. So there's plenty of information there if you're looking for more ways to build something, especially if you're worried about headroom, if that's actually going to be a problem. And if you are worried about headroom, why not make the walls a little taller? Hey, I can't, I feel like I'm going to be cramped. Well, put 10-foot walls, use 10-foot walls, conventional framing, and you don't need to use the plywood gussets. Now, something else I want to point out. With the roof ridge, we're going to be able to structurally support the fascia board on the end here, like this. If you are going to use the other method, you might want to have the fascia board something that you can nail into the framing that's not going to be supported, because you're not going to have much to support it with. And if you install lookouts in here, then you're kind of like getting back to this, what's the point? Now you're putting more pressure on this plywood gusset here, and you're adding more materials. Go back to conventionally framing it with the ridge to help you support the fascia board. And for an 8-foot building like this, 8-foot by 8-foot, do you need any lookouts? I don't think I would worry about it. But put one in if you are worried about it. What the heck? Make it as strong as you want to. And just to give you an idea what I'm talking about here, there is a spacer. And the spacer is just so that you can get the siding or the stucco behind the fascia board. So spacer is going to be whatever thickness you need. Usually it's going to be 3/4 of an inch. If your siding is going to be 3/4 of an inch, it can be larger, can be smaller. And you're going to need to have enough room to where you can slide the lathing for the stucco or the siding behind it so that it is somewhat water resistant. Another thing I want to point out about the ridge is that it's going to give you something to nail the perimeter of the plywood to. If you use the other method, you would have to block it. And you could install blocks in between the plywood gussets and the rafters and create the same effect. That won't be a problem, and that would be suggested if you do use that method. Otherwise, you're going to have a weak spot here, especially if you're using 2-foot on-center roof rafters. Not going to be as big of a problem if you're using 16-inch on-center rafters. But if you aren't going to use the blocks, and you're going to use the plywood gussets, what I would suggest is using a thicker plywood. So instead of using 1/2-inch plywood, which is a standard roof sheathing, you could always install 5/8 or 3/4-inch thick plywood to create a stronger surface. And that is about all I have to say about that. So the main point I want to drive home in this video is that for small sheds, you want to use the plywood gussets. I don't think you're going to have a big problem. And when I say a small shed, something that isn't going to be longer than 8 foot, 10 foot might be pushing it. But, again, all you need to do, if you want to use the plywood gussets and you want to make it a little stronger, you don't want to install a ridge or any blocks. Put the the rafter ties in. Install the rafter ties in here, 4 foot on center, and you're going to have a lot stronger building. Something that an engineer would rather see, or they're going to want to see these rafter ties to strengthen the roof framing and the building, probably more than anything I could think of in this particular situation. And thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, let us know by hitting the thumbs up button or letting us know in the comment area.